Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today we are going to be talking about memory retention and different study techniques and study advice that can help you boost your studying productivity and better remember the content that you need to get through. Our brains are extraordinary. Every time you learn something new, the brain is reshaping itself, creating new connections between neurons. And as the neuroscientist Dr. Marion Diamond said, the brain is a highly complex, dynamic organ that is constantly growing, changing, and adapting. This adaptability, called neuroplasticity, is the key to mastering new information. First thing I want to talk about is the hippocampus. When we study, the hippocampus acts as the brain's memory builder. And research has shown that the more actively you engage with the material you are trying to learn, the more connections are formed. And obviously the more connections that are formed, the more you're going to remember. So although it's an obvious thing to say that the more you focus on something, the more you concentrate, the more you will remember. However, it's the most important thing to talk about, because when it comes to trying to improve your revision, trying to use these study techniques that I'm going to talk about shortly, if you don't have the building blocks of how to study, including, hyper focusing on your work and spending all of your efforts when you are studying on actually learning the content, then it's not going to be of any use using these different study techniques. So when you next go to study, make an active effort to kind of fully focus and give 100% to the work at hand. And I've mentioned this in a previous video that this goes beyond just work. Anything you do in life, always give it 100% of your efforts. And if you're doing something at a certain time and you find you're not giving it 100% of your efforts, find out why you're not. And then once you've solved why you're not giving it 100% of your efforts, for example, you might be tired, you might have other things on your mind. Once you've sorted that out, then you can get back to giving it 100%. And you can really hyper focus on the revision, and a lot more of the content will stick. You will remember it more, and it will be much more beneficial and productive. So next time you study, first and foremost thing, before you try any study techniques, any of the different things that I'm going to be talking about, just make sure that you're giving it 100% of your effort and you are focusing fully on the work at hand. So the next thing I want to talk about is spaced repetition. But in order to understand why spaced repetition is so important, we need to talk about the forgetting curve. So here it is on the screen, and essentially what it shows is that when you first visit a topic and try and learn about it, read about it, and commit it to memory, if you do not revisit the information that you have studied, then over the next few hours, the next few days, most of the information that you've learned you would have forgotten. And I think it is within the first hour you would have forgotten approximately 50% of the information that you tried to study. So how do we get over this? We use a technique called spaced repetition. What is spaced repetition, however? Spaced repetition is a learning technique that involves revisiting the information at gradually larger and larger intervals. The reason the intervals get longer and longer is because once you revisit it, it is more likely to stick with you and you're more likely to remember it. So you can therefore go a longer period of time without having to revisit it to keep it in your memory. And spaced repetition is incredibly useful, especially for a degree like medicine, where there is a lot of content. So since there is a lot of content, spaced repetition can really help, because if you start early, it means that throughout the year, you will be going back over the content that you've done from the start of the year, and you'll always be reviewing all the material from the year. It won't pile up and build up for just before exams. If you do spaced repetition, then by the end of the year, you would have continually gone over all the content from the whole year, and it will make the exams a whole lot easier. How do you implement spaced repetition? I would recommend using Anki. Anki is a great revision tool. On Anki, you can study your flashcards, and after you study each flashcard, you can select after how many minutes, hours, or days you would like to review it next. And then each time you select it, the intervals will change. And so it helps you do spaced repetition, because all you have to do is study the flashcard, select when you would next like to see it, and then in that many days, you will see it again. And so every day you can revise content that you've previously seen to help consolidate it better and remember it. And so Anki is very useful for spaced repetition, and I would highly recommend everyone to use it. Next, I want to talk about the Feynman Technique, named after the physicist Richard Feynman. So this technique is all about simplifying complex pieces of information, complex subjects and topics, and teaching it to others. The principle is pretty straightforward. If you can explain to someone a difficult topic in simple terms, then it means that you do truly have an understanding and a grasp of that subject, that topic, that area. And so you don't actually have to find someone to go teach this topic to. Often I find myself when I'm studying, I'll start speaking out loud and I'll be speaking as if I'm trying to explain this topic to someone in simple terms. And what I find is that when I do this, I find it a lot easier to understand, because if there is something which I'm not so sure about, I struggle to explain it in simple terms. And also when I'm explaining this stuff as if I would be teaching it to someone, sometimes questions come up. So I might say something and then think of a question about why a certain piece of information that I've said is the way that it is. And then that encourages me to go and look up the answer, and this further deepens my knowledge and understanding of the topic. And there's a quote by the physicist Richard Feynman, and he said, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough," which I think is very true. To be able to explain something and teach something to a degree where you can make it simple for the other person to understand, you have to truly have a grasp of the content and understand it. So next time you're trying to learn a concept, if you're finding it a bit difficult, if it is a bit of a harder kind of topic or area of your course, then it might be worth trying to explain it to a friend, or if you don't want to go explain it to someone, talk out loud as if you were explaining it to someone. And if you find that you can explain this kind of topic, then it shows that you do truly understand it. And so it's just a way of consolidating the information that you've learned. Another technique that I'm sure you've all heard of is the Pomodoro Technique. And this is used to maximize productivity and focus and minimize burnout. So typically a Pomodoro is you work for 25 minutes, super focused, and then you take a 5-minute break. And then after that 5 minutes, you get back, do another 25 minutes, take another 5-minute break. And then after you've done a few Pomodoros, you might take a longer, 15, 20-minute break, and then get back to it. It doesn't have to be 25 minutes and 5 minutes. You can do 45-minute Pomodoro, 10-minute break, whatever works best for you. And the reason these Pomodoro techniques work is because often it is hard to concentrate and really, like I said earlier, give 100% of your focus for very long periods of time. So if you find yourself, you're sat at your desk, you're trying to study for 2-3 hours in a row, the chances are, as you go through your studies, as you go through those 2-3 hours, your productivity, focus, and attention are all going to decrease, and therefore the work that you're doing is not going to be as productive, and the content that you're trying to learn is most likely not going to stay with you. So break up your kind of scheduled work time that you have for yourself into smaller chunks using the Pomodoro technique. I use it a lot. Typically I like to do 50 minutes on, 10 minutes off, because I feel like 50 minutes is a nice amount of time where I can really get into the topic that I'm trying to learn. I can really understand it, get through a lot of flashcards, and then 10 minutes is a nice break where I have enough time to stretch my legs, walk around, and then come back ready, recharge for the next 50 minutes. And it's not just me saying this. There was a study published in 2014 that found that students who implemented short study breaks in between their revision sessions, they were able to sustain focus for longer and retain information more effectively than students who would sit for a very long block of time without taking these small breaks. So next time you're studying, use the Pomodoro technique, use the Fineman technique, and you will find yourself being able to retain the information a lot better, having a better understanding, a better grasp of the information, and therefore you will be able to perform better in your exams and get the results that you want. Next thing I want to talk about is sleep. We cannot ignore one of the most important aspects of studying and revision, which is having good sleep. When you're asleep, your brain isn't simply idle. It's consolidating the things that you've learned and forming these memories so that when you wake up, you actually remember and understand the information that you've studied the day before. In fact, a study in 2017 found that students who studied 7 to 8 hours retained 40% more information than students who sacrificed their sleep. Sleep is one of the most important things. If you don't have a good sleep, you will not be able to remember the information as well. And not only that, but the next day when you go to study again, you'll be more tired, more fatigued, and you will not be able to focus as much as if you had a nice sleep. And like we said earlier, in order to study effectively, you have to be hyper-focused on the work you're doing, on the stuff at hand. So if you're tired because you haven't slept much, you will not be able to fully focus on the work. You won't form as many connections. You won't be able to fully focus on the work. You won't have consolidated the information as much during your sleep, and therefore your productivity will go down a lot. It's like when you train. If you're going to the gym, running, whatever it is, whatever your form of training, rest and recovery is 50% of the training. If you don't rest and recover, you're going to get injured, you're going to have poor performance, and overall you won't be as productive. Your training sessions, they won't be worth it. And I would argue sleep is equally as important than the actual revision that you are doing, because if you don't have good sleep, like we've just mentioned, the revision will not be worth it. Next time you think of sacrificing your sleep, just remember that if you have a good night's sleep, you're going to be more productive and your work is going to be more effective. So make sure you sleep well. So the final technique I want to talk about is a technique called interleaving. And all it means is when you study, switch up what you're studying. Instead of, just studying anatomy for 3 hours straight, study anatomy for maybe the first couple of Pomodoros, then go on to some pharmacology, then some physiology. Switch up the topics and the subjects that you are studying, and because this will help massively. When you're revising, constantly switching up the topics forces your brain to have to adapt, making it harder to retrieve information and therefore strengthening those memory pathways. And not only that, but it means you're more likely to stay interested in the work that you're doing, because you're not likely to get bogged down and bored by just doing one subject for hours on end. Also, in medicine, everything is so connected that it makes sense to study all these different subjects in one revision session. Instead of, just doing anatomy for 3 hours straight, switch up the subjects you're studying, because everything is so connected. You have to have knowledge of anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, pathology for it to all come together for the bigger picture. There's a famous quote by Aristotle that goes, "The more you know, the more you realize you don't know." And so if you're constantly switching up the subjects you're learning, trying to build those connections between different subjects and find those links, the more you do that, the more you will realize where the gaps in your knowledge are. And if you find the gaps in your knowledge, then you can figure out which areas you need to focus on, turn those weaker areas into your strengths. That concludes everything I wanted to talk about, all the different study techniques. So I hope it has been useful. And next time you go to study, make sure you try and implement some of these into your own work, and make sure, just take away the key points from this video. Make sure you're fully focused at anything you do in life, not just studying. Make sure you're always giving it 100% of your efforts and you're fully focused on that work. Make sure you sleep well, because if you don't sleep, then your work is going to be less productive. And then if you implement the Pomodoro Technique, the Feynman Technique, and the Interleaving Technique, and if you use these techniques, I'm sure you will see a big change in the way your revision is going. You'll have a better understanding of the topic, you will remember the information more readily, and overall your memory retention will increase. So, like I said, hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and goodbye. I will see you next week.